Hey there, boy. You got the time? And no, I don't need you pulling out your damn Apple Watch or nothing. I'm asking if you got time to sit down for a little story. One about days gone by and a land that seems so far out of reach in today's times. Now, I must warn you, I ain't like these folks that are all around these days. I come from a different age, learned from different folks, and I'm old enough to remember when things weren't so darn crazy all the time. Now with that out of the way, cause I know you snowflakes just need to be warned about everything these days. Let me sit you down and learn you something that they ain't gonna teach you in no liberal universities. I know you can't tell much by the looks of it, but you're in America. And America has a long and storied history of triumph after triumph. They ain't call it the greatest country on God's green earth for nothing after all. Not only did we come into this country empty-handed and built the greatest nation man's ever seen, we also taught the Indians about farming and medicine, civilization, and my two personal favorites, guns and liberty. This is so bad. God, I hate myself for this one. You see, this is how Americans used to be, back before all this politically correct nonsense. We were a strong, a proud, and a resilient people. From the one true Abrahamic Lord above, we were tasked, and I mean we were tasked hard, with manifesting our destiny. From sea to shining sea, we climbed over every mountain and galloped our way through every amber wave of grain. We didn't let nothing stand in our way. And if they did, well, they'd get their meat loaded with my two favorite words in the entire Constitution. The Second Amendment. The Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is the truest of truths. As the great Ronald Reagan once said, under no pretext are arms and ammunitions to be surrendered, and any attempt to disarm the working man must be stopped by force if necessary. If you can believe it, current phony-in-chief is trying to take them away from us right now as we speak, going so far as to threaten us with nuclear bombs and fighter jets. I just think this whole world's gone stir crazy. I don't know what happened to the country I grew up in. Back in 2007, we didn't have anything even remotely resembling this nonsense going on. This was a country for the good old boys, for folks like me, and everything's just so backwards and upside down these days. They're trying to take our most important and fundamental of human rights away from us, the right to defend ourselves against tyranny. Nobody has ever been so vehement in trying to take away the rights of any person in this country in its history. Thankfully, we got numbers like they wouldn't believe. They know we're the silent majority, and when we get loud, we make change happen. Just like when we got Donald J. Trump elected president 5 long years ago. Hey, didn't Trump, lose the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives all in his first term? Did you just say represidented? The liberals don't want to tell you this. They act like it's all just some big joke. But we've also got the NRA backing us, and their numbers are growing by the day. Closing in on 20% of all gun owners are a member, and they saw nearly a 33% increase in membership between 2017 and 2018. 10 years ago, we got statistics detailing over $250 million in funding. So just imagine how big that number is nowadays. I just don't know what everybody's problem is. All the NRA does is call out radical extremists that everyone is too pussy-whipped to touch on. They promote the rights of Americans, protect our liberties from governmental tyranny, and uphold our Constitution.
Alright, that's it. I've heard enough. That's more than enough out of you. Get down. I'm coming up in a minute. Get your ass off that stage. Let me get something decent on, and you're out of here right the hell now.
Ain't that so much better? Sorry about my grandson. Not only is he a hot-headed dumbass, but he fell down the alt-right rabbit hole in 2015 and he ain't been the same since. Ever since he found out I voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, he's been off his damn rocker, pretending he knows what adrenochrome is, or that lizards are controlling the government. You can't reason with this man or any of his ilk. Best you can do is take them down off their pedestals and correct the records best you can, so folks like you don't end up buying into his horse shit. I mean, did you hear him? Still peddling the same old garbage, ignoring basically all of history and precedent. America is the world's first democracy. Gun-toting QAnon hicks are the ones that freed the slaves. Give me a GD break. So sit down, honey, and I'll give you a real history lesson. Also, I'm not doing the voice anymore, so, sorry if you're into that. This story isn't a very complicated one. The NRA has been around for 150 years. In 1871, a couple of ragtag gun owners from New York. Ragtag. I've got the hillbilly brainworms. Anyways, the two of them banded together to form an organization in order to promote gun education and shooting for sport. These gentlemen, William Church and George Wingate, were ex-Union officers during the Civil War, and they were upset with how shoddy the marksmanship of Union soldiers was. The accuracy of your average Union soldier was so remarkably bad that an official study was conducted and it estimated that only 1 in every 1,000 rounds fired by Union soldiers ended up actually striking a Confederate soldier. The goal was a simple one: to properly educate and equip a new generation of gun owners to take care of their guns and shoot them accurately, whether for wartime or simply hunting game for sport. In the beginning, the NRA was a beloved and exciting new organization. So much so that the government of New York helped to finance their first range and other upstart funding. Guns were simply a way of life for many Americans at the time. Not only were they symbols of freedom and triumph over the Revolutionary and Civil Wars, they were also integral to rural and frontier life. Guns were a staple of early American culture, representing the blossom of independence and the newly reigning philosophy of American exceptionalism. The NRA continued to grow in prominence, and by the mid to late 20th century it was powerful enough to start influencing legislation, the genesis of its political reign that still continues today. Now, if you want to talk about things that aren't getting told, it's that the NRA wasn't always so obsessively opposed to reasonable gun control legislation. In fact, they worked with the federal government initially to limit gun sales to convicts or the mentally ill. As handguns became more popular, they supported and promoted state-level concealed carrying permits. As part of FDR's New Deal, and just so we're clear, we're talking about the NRA as in the National Rifle Association, not the National Recovery Administration or whatever was actually part of the New Deal. They worked with Congress to ban the use of shotguns and Tommy guns due to them being the weapon of choice for a surge in bank robberies and gun violence. The Gun Control Act of 1938 made it so gun sellers had to register with the government. This was the first step in fleshing out firearm merchants as a federally regulated industry. Again, the NRA at the time was a public advocate for this policy. This ideal of responsible gun ownership actually continued to tighten for some time, most notably in response to the assassinations of John and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. This all sounds pretty based, right? You can keep your guns, as many of them as you want, but if the circumstances call for it, certain sacrifices have to be made to protect citizens and elected officials from maniacs. After all, it is undeniable that guns can lead to deaths if they're in the hands of the wrong person. Either someone who is unwell, or someone who just simply isn't experienced or cautious enough to really responsibly use one in the first place. Study after study shows that gun owners correlate with higher averages of both homicide and suicide. While very, very cool, guns at the end of the day are dangerous weapons and not to be taken lightly. Okay, but back on topic. Big spoiler alert, the NRA began to change its tune eventually. And it's a damn shame too. They've managed to be such a garbage organization that they've even turned most liberals off guns. And liberals are supposed to be all about freedom and individualism and standing the government or whatever. You've got to inject some serious propaganda brainworms in order to get liberals to keep lapping up the breadcrumbs of the free market but turn up their nose at owning guns. Though, thankfully, once you go far enough left, you do get your guns back. Under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the workers must be frustrated, by force if necessary. Guns are sick. Not only can they be beautiful feats of craftsmanship and engineering, but they're also intricate and complex and fascinating devices. Shooting them and improving your marksmanship is great fun and incredibly rewarding. Imagine a world where our gun ownership orgs promoted that kind of positive and stimulating gun ownership, albeit in a much more responsible tone and practice, rather than fear-mongering about the need to protect yourself from migrants or selling some fantasy about protecting your property from the federal government. Your AR-15 will not stop a tank. I repeat, your AR-15 will not stop a tank. So, before we get lost in the sauce here, what changed? When did the NRA really start going off the deep end? This story is a little bit more wild, so if you need it, go pour you up some whiskey and have a few sips before we really start to get down to it. Let's get to it. I don't even really know where to begin here. I guess with some dates. Dates are usually how I'm best at getting the ball rolling here. 1971, 100 years after its inception, is the year that the NRA began to dramatically change to more closely resemble the organization that we have today. The initial cause of this change was the controversial killing of one Ken Ballew, Ken Ballew, at the hands of federal agents during an awfully fishy raid. Ballew was suspected to have several dangerous weapons, including a stash of grenades. The raid began with the Federal Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division planning a joint raid with the local police forces at Montgomery and Prince George's counties in Maryland. At this time, they were working with a teenage burglary suspect who was acting as a cooperative informant for the police agencies. The informant told them that they had seen several guns and grenades at apartment number 2 in a complex located in Silver Springs, Maryland. The department had previously planned to raid apartment 102, so they just decided to tack on apartment 2 on the same day because can't afford to miss them, I guess. The U.S. Attorney Office initially denied adding the second raid of Apartment 2 to the operation, stating that the anecdotal account of a teenage informant was insufficient evidence. So the head of the task force began digging in order to find sufficient incriminating evidence in order to justify the raid. The first of which was a threat that the organization had received. Were they to search the area, they would be met with gunfire. This threat was also brushed off as the surrounding neighborhoods has a reputation of being high in violent crime and criminal havens, and the origins of the threat couldn't be identified as having come from apartment 2. Later, they managed to find the suspect's full name and found that he had a concealed carry misdemeanor from 1970 and that he had registered no grenades. Cause that's like a thing people do. Are your grenade registrations up to date? Cause mine sure as hell aren't. With this new information in tow, on the day of the raid of apartment 102, they were given permission and a warrant to also conduct a raid on apartment 2. And just so nobody thinks I'm leaving anything out here, the raid of 102 was a big nothing burger. There was just a child and a babysitter there, and the task force left a note. Still, they attempted to retain the surprise factor on Ballew despite conducting both raids on the same day. So they arrived in civilian clothes to avoid standing out as much. Ballew's apartment had a heavy metal door that he kept blocked with furniture. The officers knocked on the door and demanded that he come out. There was no response, but they heard noises coming from inside, so they opted to begin battering the door down. A woman staying at Ballew's apartment responded that she was nude and Ballew was in the bath at the moment. Panicking, she grabbed a gun and urged Ballew to come out of the shower. He also grabbed a gun and stood in the corridor of his apartment, still butt-ass naked, facing the door with his weapon drawn, full spread, eagle stance, balls in the breeze, the whole package. This caused himself and the second of the 3 officers to duck and begin firing before the 3rd officer entered and shot Ballew in the head. He collapsed and his gun discharged a round once it hit the floor. The woman who was at the residence surrendered to the police and was taken into custody as the officers searched the apartment. They recovered a large stock of various weapons and ammunition, including the alleged grenades from the informant's testimony. Here's the real kicker here. Of the 5 grenades that they seized, all 5 of them were either unloaded, inert, or otherwise completely harmless. The type of thing that you would find in a military memorabilia store. Literally just souvenirs that didn't have to be registered in the first place. I'm getting kind of drunk here. He used them for fucking bookends, and 2 of them were fashioned as pop caps so he could make noise on his balcony during the 4th of July. Ballew survived, but suffered permanent brain damage. He sued the government for damages, citing his spotless military record, lack of charges despite his misdemeanor, status as a Boy Scout troop leader, and being an all-around decent fella as reasons why getting shot in the head was pretty fucked up. He lost his case in 1975. This sparked big controversy in the gun ownership communities. The biggest criticism was of the poor execution and non-procedural nature of the raid. A daytime service knock didn't entail showing up at someone's house at 8:30 p.m. in civilian clothes and battering down their back door. Critics of the raid also said that it was clear, given a proper investigation, that Ballew was not dangerous and there simply wasn't enough information to justify such a raid. Before we really get into the NRA's descent here, can we just imagine how unbelievably based it would be to have an anti-police gun ownership community like an ACAB NRA? Holy shit, it would be so based. Based AF. I need to stop saying based so much. Now, by this point, the NRA had already begun to fracture in its ideals a little bit. The riots of the 1960s civil rights protests caused many white Americans to take a more hardline and interpersonal stance on self-defense and aggression when it came to gun ownership, rather than one that was more aimed at the government. This included some in the NRA who wanted the organization to be front and center of this gun control discourse and encourage a new wave of gun ownership in the wake of a new wave of gun control legislation. A new wing of the NRA was formed, their very own governmental lobbying organization, known as the Institute of Legislative Action, or ILA. It was headed by one of the rising managers of the NRA, Harlan Carter, an anti-immigration nationalist who was previously head of Border Patrol in the 1950s. He's probably most famous for the sentiment found in the quote, "You don't stop crime by attacking guns, you stop crime by attacking criminals." His philosophy was at odds with some of the old heads of the NRA, who favored pragmatic and reasonable gun control, while he viewed gun control as oppressive government overreach in its entirety. He organized the first annual NRA convention in 1977 in order to draw publicity to the power struggles within the organization. He continued to rise in power until he was vice president of the entire NRA and appointed a fellow hardline gun advocate to head the ILA. He had stern orders to take an affirmative stance against any and all attempts by the government to control guns. Its successes in lobbying continued to balloon following decisions from the Supreme Court on political finance, allowing them to receive huge amounts of donations, particularly from multi-millionaire donors, gun manufacturers, and sellers. Their power as a political institution was so immense that Harlan Carter claimed that any politician who dared to challenge them would fail. By 2000, the NRA was strong enough to begin sparring with presidents. Their new president, Carlton Heston, is most famous for his address at presumed to be President Al Gore at the NRA's 2000 convention. The speech was capped off with him holding up a rifle and proclaiming, "From my cold, dead hands." This went on to be a slogan for gun-toting hogs across the nation, making its way onto the bumpers of rusty F-150s far and wide. The hardline stance Harlan Carter set the NRA on has continued to be carried by pretty much every leader they've had since, and with their influences and finances exploding, why would they ever change? Even in the events of mass shootings or attempts on politicians' lives, the NRA continues to back the same stances that it has by this point for over 20 years. For example, following the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan, an assault weapons bill passed through a Democratic Congress was lobbied by the NRA to include a 10-year expiry. 10 years later, under a GOP Congress, the bill quietly expired. It seems by now the NRA has a tried and true formula to avoid conceding any ground in the event of a mass shooting. You know, the whole, we can't make mass shootings political thing. Guns are our God-given right. Something freedom, something liberty, something. If it's anyone's fault, it's them violent thugs and them video games and them Hollywood elites poisoning our youth and giving them violent urges. And then they tote out the old classic mic drop banger. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. So that's how things got so crazy surrounding gun control. I initially just wanted to talk about the shady operation and financing of the NRA, but that wouldn't really be fun, would it? In 2008, the NRA received $2 million from Beretta. And in 2012, Smith & Wesson donated $1 million. In 2011 and 2012, Strum Ruger & Co. held a fundraiser and donated $1.2 million to the NRA. They make an assload of money from their 5 million members and numerous billionaire donors who have never fired a gun in their entire lives. Like, that would have been the entire video. How fucking lame. I like to get to the bottom of things. I'm not interested in knowing why you stole my cookie. I'm interested in knowing what underlying conditions led you to believe you couldn't just ask me for one, which I would have given you one if you just asked. So anyways, I wanted to dress up like a grandma and tell campfire stories over a glass of booze about why gun ownership in America sucks so fucking bad. As for business practices, I think directly lobbies to obstruct gun-controlled legislation in the attempt of an attempted presidential assassination is more than enough to cover the depths of their degeneracy. Not really all that shockingly, they also take a stance in favor of murderers during gun control protests. They have a long record of framing activists as violent thugs or radical anarchists or whatever else. Kind of funny that 100 years ago, these protesters would have been the types of anti-establishment, justice-hungry vigilantes who would have found their way into the ranks of the NRA. I guess the big question remaining is, what can we do to fight against them? Is there a way to defeat the NRA and end the obstruction of justice surrounding gun violence? Well, I don't fucking know. What do you take me for? Some kind of scholar or policy wonk? I am literally just an alcoholic with a high school diploma that waits tables for a living. But nonetheless, you can tell I'm having a hard time with this video because I'm out of ice. So these are some things I actually have thought a little bit about before, but I'm not sure how realistic everything is, and some of the solutions I know aren't realistic. So let's just dream a little. We have fun here. Let's have a dream where you could do anything. The NRA prides itself on being an organization that apparently promotes responsible gun ownership and usage. Well, what if there was simply a government initiative for it instead? Something widespread and decentralized. A network of organizations, if you will. You could package it as a jobs program or something to get liberals on board. Imagine if at every store that sold guns, there were kiosks set up for certified firearm coaches, allowing you to sign up on the spot for scheduled gun training courses. I'm talking every Walmart, every Academy, every Dick's Sporting Goods. If there is a single fucking gun for sale, have someone there capable of signing you up for a few rounds of federally subsidized, personalized, hands-on, one-on-one training with a diverse range of trainers for an equally diverse range of new, responsible gun owners. That's bare minimum, one new job for every retail gun store in the US. A quick Google search estimates that 65,000 locations. Then include additional staffing at small businesses, indoor and outdoor ranges, bookkeepers and managers, and suddenly you're pushing 100,000 new jobs. And new ways to ensure that guns are bought and used safely. Make it a tax incentive, so you can get back some of your hiked up sales tax on your firearm if you attend one of these courses. Make it so that small businesses who allow these trainers to set up at the locations get tax breaks or subsidies. Republicans freaking love tax breaks, especially when it's about guns and other hog wild stuff. Tell them they'll get boiled peanuts for signing up. Boom, more jobs. More hog bait. Give the employees and contractors travel opportunities. Have your own drivers for these organizations. Even more jobs. To combat the NRA's conventions, you can have city-sponsored festivals or something, like the Macy's Day Parade, to bring together gun owners and to celebrate responsible ownership. Make it a town fair, where you can go eat funnel cake and listen to some guy stand on a bale of hay and talk about the importance of life and liberty and the pursuit of affordable ammunition. Just soak that shit in old school Americana. As for their political influence, it is awfully hard to match hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate money, but it's absolutely possible in the right circumstances. Grassroots candidates make massive waves simply with small dollar donations. So long as you can get everybody on the same page, fundraising can pull in massive amounts of money for good causes. Get the live streamers on board, I don't know, get the archers and crossbowers on board. Do cool publicity stunts like filling a Confederate monument with tannerite and blasting that bitch into the stratosphere. Hell, make a new organization. Call it the Liberal Arms Activists. Much like the Gravel Institute is to PragerU, create a left-leaning counter-organization to the rampant reign of high-dollar Republican fundraising. They can have their own operations, their own conventions, their own hype, their own fundraising modes. Have them sponsoring and working in tandem with gun violence protesters, spotlighting the issues and spreading first-hand accounts of the violence that victims endure. Have them offer mental health services, therapies, and shelters for people who have cause to be afraid of living with a violent gun owner. Have them lobby the government. ActBlue has been a tremendous asset for Democratic candidates. Get to decentralizing those funds. Put it towards creating institutions with the express goal of real material change for specific realms of politics. Why limit it to just electing establishment candidates that have milquetoast gun policy? It just blows me away that this isn't something that has even moderate Dems from conservative areas frothing at the mouth. Imagine if Joe Manchin, instead of focusing on not letting people vote, took his old-ass blue dog energy out to union workers to start building publicity for such an organization. Talking about how the NRA has corrupted real patriotism and responsible gun ownership. With enough generosity, he'd go down as the guy who started the end of the NRA's grip on our government, instead of being the worst Democrat on the face of the planet. So, that's the NRA, how it got so crazy, why it's so garbage, and what I hope could be done about it at some point in the future. It's literally just a safe space for historically ignorant, trigger-happy hogs like the guy at the start of this video who want to feed their bloodlust fantasies by playing superhero. They don't give a damn about preventing violence. They don't give a damn about saving lives. They don't give a damn about teaching people how to responsibly use guns or to raise awareness. Much like every other right-wing organization in this country, all they care about is gaining ground in the culture war, keeping their base absolutely petrified in fear, and raking in cash. And I know that this is all extremely forehead, like, just make a new organization, dummy. But really, what else can you do? The GOP is in lockstep with the NRA, and Democrats are just like mildly ambivalent to it. It's like David versus Goliath, but Goliath is dual-wielding M16s and David lost his fucking sling. If there's any millionaire liberals or prolific community organizers here, you're welcome. Make me a plaque or something. I don't even really want equity. I just want gun violence to stop and for gun culture to not be dominated by absolutely insane right-wingers and propaganda factories. So, pass it along, get your lefty friends on board, send my regards to Soros, gunpill your liberal friends. Can we please just make guns fucking cool again? I am so fucking tired of people thinking I'm a Republican for going to the range. And that's it, there is no outro, I hope you liked it, bye.